Hello, my name is Jochen Hick and I have the film My Wonderful West-Berlin showing in the panorama section this year, and it's about the queer scene in West-Berlin, mainly gay, from the 1950s to the 1990s, and you can see like a lot of people in telling about situations which most younger and also some older people even don't recall anymore. And it gives an idea about the gay movement as well in the mirror of West-Berlin, or mirroring in West-Berlin, although we know that other cities like Hamburg, Bremen, Frankfurt, Münster were also very important for the gay movement. So it's the second part of the trilogy about Berlin. The first one was out in East Berlin 2013, and the next one is to come hopefully soon from 1989 till to date. So have a look, and I think it's very worth watching.
In Deutschland stand auch nach 1945 sogenannte Unzucht unter Männern unter Strafe. Viele Schwule wurden erpresst und denunziert oder landeten im Gefängnis. Die Bundesrepublik hatte den von den Nazis verschärften § 175, der während des Dritten Reichs tausende Schwule in Konzentrationslager brachte, unverändert übernommen. Bis 1969 gab es über 50.000 Verurteilungen in der Bundesrepublik und West-Berlin.
Welcome, Jochen Hick. You're here at the film festival with the film My Wonderful West-Berlin, Mein Wunderbares West-Berlin. With a documentary out in Ost, Lesben und Schwule in der DDR, made in 2013, you said already the queer scene, or set a scene by the queer scene beyond the wall in the limelight. Do you consider My Wonderful West-Berlin as a continuation of this project, or is it rather a project of its own?
Out in East Berlin 2013, I did it together with Andreas Strohfeld. This is of course a continuation of it. I am planning kind of a trilogy, and this now is the second part. The first part was East Berlin, the second part is West Berlin, both films and around Fall of the Wall. Mm-hmm. And now I think what's to come is Berlin until today, with all the also sexual politics and what's happening here. But it's a continuation in a way, yeah.
You made about like 20 films, mainly documentaries.
Oh, not 20 films. It's about, it looks more than it is. It's about, I think, 12 feature-length films.
Okay.
And a few shorts.
Okay.
Yeah.
And mostly they were dealing with LGBT subjects.
Yeah.
So two questions about your oeuvre. So what's thrilling for you about the genre of documentary?
I always think that decent, not talking about my documentaries because I like my documentaries, but I think I also sometimes prefer to watch documentaries, because even a bad documentary is 10 times better than a bad fiction film. Because at least you have some value that you saw something which really happens if the documentary captures something. I think since I did 2 fiction films, it's a totally different thing. I'm more a person who's always collecting stuff, people, situations, and therefore a documentary is very valuable for this way of doing things. Also, I'm very much interested in themes. I hate when fiction films are about themes, but I think documentaries can be quite a bit about themes, and it works.
Definitely, absolutely.
And since I love to see documentaries myself, I do them myself as well. Also, the other thing is when you do queer films, of course you have much less money usually. And the thing, you really can start off also without money, because I started off in many films without 1 cent, and sometimes got the money after the film was released back. You can do this with a documentary, because I also do camera work in my documentaries. In this I shared it together with Alexander Georgiou, but you can start with very little money. sometimes and still go on and collect, and you are a one-person show sometimes, not in this film. But I remember films where I did even sound, camera, all by myself, and they ended up on the Berlinale. So, I don't want to do this anymore because it's really, really exhausting. But you can't do this with fiction, of course. You need much more money, and since you need more money, you also need television and fundings, and I had bad luck with television and funding in my first 15, 20 years. It was pretty tough.
I see. So to specialize in LGBT aspects in your work, was it a decision or rather a must for you as a gay man?
I was studying film at the Arts Academy in Hamburg, and anyways, the thing was like, not really express yourself in the most stupidest way, but you should be aware what you are, and from there do films and not think you are not a subject within the film, and you just film something which is totally separate from you. So, I thought, I mean, you know, there are about 1,000 back then. Now it's a little bit different, but back then there were about 1,000 heterosexual love stories to one existing gay love story in film and on television, and many things haven't been done before. So I did with Via Appia the first film in Germany about AIDS. I did the first film about the Russian gay movement and all these things. Not that I'm proud of it that I did it, but because it was just not done, because there was no money for it, there was no interest in television. And the thing is, like, when you do documentaries, of course, you meet a lot of people on the way, and all these people have also stories that you think, okay, this is also something which has never been done and it's really important, or I would be really interested to go a little bit into it. And that's why you do more films consequently, or after that, after your first project, because one develops out of the other. So that's a bit it. So, but you know, many people say, oh, you're always doing gay films, and I tell people you're always doing heterosexual films, whatever, you know. It's
I mean, I think we are far away from equality, like heterosexual and like queer rights. So I mean, there's a must to make like queer films, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's not only the production side. I mean, it's still a fact. If heterosexual people would go to a movie theater on a Saturday night and they would have the choice between a gay and a straight love story, they would go and see the straight love story. That's why always gay audiences are usually a little bit smaller, unless you do gay films for an extremely broad audience. But then also sometimes you lose a little bit what is really important for gay and lesbian and trans people, because they also have the right to have films which are very much in depth and intellectually interesting, and not always explaining or making it easy accessible for straight audiences. While straight audiences have gone so much deep into all their topics because there's so much around, and they also have so much audience. So
it's always on the edge between like hiding and showing yourself or making yourself visible, right? Especially with like queer films.
Yeah,
like
because people would always say you're a gay filmmaker, and this is like for a commissioning editor at a TV station. When you say or when they say, oh, this is a gay subject, they always, in their head, it's already okay, mostly gays or lesbians or trans people will see it. And if we are lucky, some more. And that's why even the public stations are working like this. I'm kind of lucky now with this commissioning editor who's very supporting, and I'm doing the third project with him, but it's not easy. I know it from other people still.
I mean, it's interesting. You have a lot of found and footage in your movie. So how's it for you to dive into the archives?
Yeah, to dive into the archives is also something which is a little bit strange, because you see how little has been filmed. even in Germany. I think maybe the US is a little bit different because people were much more used to film in Super 8, or even families were filming their children. So we found less than I would expect we found. People find it very, very intense, and that there's a lot of archival material, but I still would say when you, for example, go into the national or local broadcaster, public broadcaster's archive, there's about nothing about gay things before maybe, I don't know, 78. Because there's maybe there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things which really dealt with homosexuality, and that's it. Maybe there were the Tuntenball, because also straight people went there, but it's very, very little.
That's quite interesting and quite depressing too.
Yeah,
I think.
it's depressing too, and the other thing is that, of course, people didn't photograph in special situations because of the law, because of paragraph 175. For example, it's really, really hard to find any pictures of the interior of gay bars, for example, because people didn't film, didn't photograph, and so there's very little existing. But still, you'll see.
I mean, it's one of your interviews mentions a photo book with photos of homosexuals that was shown to him in the police station after he was picked up after a raid. So denunciation was a common tool even in post-war Germany.
Yeah.
Isn't this a real symbol for the incredible injustice that happened to the queer community?
Of course, it's
I mean, there you
the
have the
biggest
photos.
insult
This is
the biggest insult was that they just took the same paragraph and the same severe kind from the Nazis and just put it onto the Bundesrepublik, onto West Germany. In East Germany it was a little bit different. As we all know, but in West Germany it was really tough, and of course they tried to denounce people and tried whatever they could, but I think it's not an injustice which has ended, because as we know, no one has really gotten official rehabilitation, nor anyone has gotten compensation. It's still only talking about it, and still our Ministry of Justice, they are talking about it, and so as we know, most people will be dead by then. So I think, I mean, they are now in their 70s, 80s, 90s, and you know, they won't be alive when this law comes through.
That's too bad. You edited some footage of Senderfreies Berlin, the broadcasting station in West-Berlin for television and radio. And it was like a movie that was made for television in 1965. And I just want to cite incorrigible parasites of society on the periphery of laws.
Yeah.
And they call for reforms of the law just to make it even worse for the gays. So it's like, I mean...
Yeah, I mean the thing is, like, paragraph 175 was reformed, but it wasn't really reformed that much because people were in the street against it, or whether it was really big public discussion. It was more that different individuals and also groups kind of lobbied for the change of the law. But still, as you can see there in 1965, it's all one thing: gay prostitution, sexual disease, gay people, gay bars, whatever, and also already everyone is a prostitute. Even if I'd say whatever. I mean, prostitution is also something, if you know, it depends on if people have to do it under pressure or however. But it's pretty tough. Also, there's this commentator on this piece about Zoologischer Garten, which is the train station here, and they are filming these young men who are walking the train station. It's so amazing because, they say they are prostitutes, but they're even wearing suits and ties, and which is really, I mean, no one would expect this nowadays. And this already is, it's really interesting. It's really interesting, and also in the film are shown some some reports of these raids where they went from one bar to the other bar, like sometimes 15 bars in one night, and raided them and took all people to the police to get their identity, and you know.
So, but nevertheless, in the late 60s, beginning of the 70s, like there was like a kind of revolution. So people went on street, like the homosexual Aktion West-Berlin just like started.
So in '69, the law was reformed for the first time, and after that, and even before, some of the members of the future homosexual Aktion West-Berlin, which was very studentic, mostly students, mostly left-wing, and
yes.
as a mirror of that time, they were also parallelly organized or close to all the leftish movements, like to the Maoists, to the Trotskyists, some to the Soviet or East German, for example, what was called SEV, for example. There's this whole thing in Berlin also about how you write West Berlin. Like kind of the leftish writing would be West Berlin in one word, because they wouldn't accept that it's really an entity itself. Whereas West Berlin with this dash in between is the thing like West Germany would have to consider what West Berlin is. So all these things came up, and they, at first, they were always kind of put at the end of these demonstrations when they had their banners, and even sometimes because many leftish people didn't like that, because they thought, oh, this is kind of, I mean, they were also homophobic, of course, and they always put them at the end, where also the anarchists were, after a while, they did also their own demonstrations, and so what we have on the film is like the first HAV demonstration, which is pretty impressive that we have the footage, because one of the HAV members, HAW, it's not HAV, oh my God, HAW. One of the members, Wilfried Laule, he was a teacher and he had a Super 8 camera and he filmed it. And so these are so rare and special things. They even, they had sometimes like political, picketings near Kurfürstendamm or near Kranzler, and against paragraph 175, or playing gay theater or stuff like this, and he filmed all of this. So in 1969, the infamous paragraph 175 was reformed. And after that, also after the film of Rosa von Braunheim, Not the Homosexual is Perverse, all these organizations formed. And the Berlin organization was the Homosexual Action West Berlin, HAW, and they were kind of a leftist, very studentic organization. And you see in the film a couple of founding members there. And they also were part of the leftish organizations at the time. So they were Trotskyists, Maoists, and some were very close to like the Soviet or East Berlin SEV party, because there was a party sponsored by or from East Berlin. And so, but also the leftish people weren't so nice with them, at least not in the beginning, because they thought, because all we know is they were always put at the end of the demonstrations together with the anarchists, until they formed their own demonstration once, which was 1973. But before, even the leaflets, when they handed out the leaflets about homosexuals, also for the working class or whatever, sometimes those papers were hit out of their hands by some other leftish people, because they thought this is dirt for the left movement. Because as we also know, there's the thing like that they say, okay, first capitalism has to be abolished, and then a thing like homosexuality will
Human rights
will come by itself or whatever, and you know. So, and also there's this other saying, of course, as we know, which is in Germany and also other countries since the end of the 19th century, that homosexuality is kind of a sign of a very bourgeois and decadent way of life. So, you know, all these things made it kind of difficult for them. They could have packed it together with the women's movement,
This is
but they
interesting.
didn't.
Yeah, it's
But they didn't. Maybe also because they put too many penises on the wall, and also the lesbians who were at first also at the Homosexuelle Aktion West-Berlin. There was a group, a lesbian group, but they found that their topics were never discussed, that the men always discussed about their own topics, that they always talked first, that they interrupted, whatever. And so they split and founded their own organization. And I really can say that in Berlin, they were quite separated for quite a while, and that's why we also didn't include what happened with the lesbians, because we had really to tell two totally different stories, and 40 years on lesbians and on gay people and maybe even on trans would be so superficial that we only tried to find out why they left, but only from the view what gay men captured about why they left. Because we, you know, taking then one lesbian protagonist to tell why they left would also be totally wrong, because you need at least 5 to have the different views on it. So I hope that after this film, that's why it also ends a little bit with lesbians. Not, I don't hope it, but I think the lesbian film should come and the trans film should come. There are many things about this time frame which should be told. You know?
What you capture in your film as well is quite interesting, and then we have like a quite gap in between, like the beginning 70s and then like the beginning 80s, when the AIDS crisis hit the queer community very hard, and like they were just about like getting more freedom for themselves, and then the crisis came. I mean, then again, like, or like not again, but like lesbians and gay and all the queer people were marching on the street again. I mean, so definitely this was like a changing point for the community, don't you think so? Because they were forced
it was a changing point, and I think there were also lesbians involved. I don't really have the numbers. I always have the idea when I see pictures from, for example, ACT UP USA, that there were more women and lesbians, especially lesbians, involved in the American movement, because they were always a little bit more united, at least for the political way. And I think with the AIDS crisis, I think it started to come together again. And but I still think it's not, the whole thing is not really balanced when you think about how many gay bars there are in Berlin, and that, for example, the last the lesbian magazine wrote like that. The last discotheque, lesbian discotheque, was closed last year in January in Berlin. And so there's really something one has to find out what. Yeah, I'm not sure whether they get invisible or whether they maybe are everywhere and visible in another way. But this is interesting. I would be interesting to know more about it. But I'm not the one who should talk and I talk
from
for
your
them
point of view as a man,
because that's not interesting. I think it's not interesting.
And it wouldn't be fair, I guess, too. It's
Also,
like, I mean, you should tell this very own story from a female point of view, I guess. So, just like a few more questions.
A few more questions before we end.
Before we run out of time. So, I thought when I saw your movie, this should be screened in schools. What do you think about that?
Of course, I think you also could screen it on schools. I think there should be like, possibly, no, I don't think there should be, but there are maybe 2 or 3 things which maybe even television would edit. For example, some excerpts of the film Taxi zum Klo, where one guy pees on the other guy, and you know, but heterosexual do it as well. Everyone does it when people are into that kind of sex, and But I think it can be showed because it really gives an idea, although it's only told about Berlin, and I would never say that Berlin was the gay movement in Germany, because there were also other cities doing very important, Frankfurt, Bremen, Münster, Hamburg. There were really, really other cities where also very important things happened. But since this is the Berlin trilogy, I put all the parts which happened in Berlin, and not even all the parts. It's like always flashlights. But what you really can see is like kind of how time passed by, how things developed, and it's kind of a microcosmos in which you can see how also non-political people became political, or how a non-political or more political scene, also the party scene, which I think is important for gay life. All these things started off, and what's interesting in this film is like that you really can see that many things Berlin is so extremely proud of today, and you know, all people who are coming to Berlin always want to be close to what is like this sub-scene and subculture and everything, which is vanishing more and more and more. And so, you know, the rich people or straight people or whatever, they move into Kreuzberg to be close to this subculture, but the subculture isn't there anymore. But what you really can see is that a lot of this subculture really comes from a queer subculture. And you can see it in the film, that a lot of things, and even for example Westberlin, who's in the film, who is kind of the father of techno, he says without the gay people being kind of the initiative, being kind of the first motor of like understanding dancing and music like a musical wave, like a more, you know, big thing, they were kind of the motors of the techno scene, which then of course wouldn't have lived through if the unification wouldn't have happened, because the East Germans were very much into it. And he says without East Germany, techno would have died.
So my last question, so all the impulses, do you think, come from for changes and liberation, come from the queer scene, as you just like mentioned? Are they immortal?
I think the queer scene has a lot, no, I think a lot came from the women's movement for the queer scene, I would say. But also, for example, the gay scene is not the women's movement, it's really a different thing. But I think a lot of things of today are also human rights things, which also have their power originating in the queer scene, but also the queer scene profits from other influences. I would say right now we are really at a point where you really have to look very, very closely on the things, whether does the queer scene sometimes, you know, or gay or lesbian scene become a little bit identitaire, you know, or how is really the discussion? Are they excluding or are they really coming together? We have now the discussion that trans people find themselves excluded, and lesbians they find themselves invisible. What is the contribution of the gays to make these other groups not invisible, or is it their impulse that the others are invisible? All these things are really interesting, and at the moment, since we have so many dangerous things around us and
right
also
now,
happening possibly in the future, it's first interesting to have a close look about what's happening within the community and seeing these things, and then
understand.
Maybe finding out what to do, you know. But I think sometimes I think the nicest years are a little bit over for at least a decade.
We hope not.
We hope not,
Definitely.
but I hope you are right.
Thanks. Thank you so much for the interview,
Thank you.
and good luck for your third part of the trilogy.
Yeah. So I'm Jochen Hick, and I would like to recommend to you the film My Wonderful West-Berlin, which screens in Panorama section, and it's about the queer scene, mostly gay, I have to admit, from the 1950s through to the fall of the wall, and it gives also a good idea about some highlights of the gay movement, although the gay movement, as we all know, didn't only happen in Germany, in Berlin, but also in other cities. This is very important to say, because otherwise all these other people will be completely pissed, and they are right. Okay?
Thank you so much.